I learned that night that silence can be louder than screaming if the right person is listening. The first thing you notice about a place like Bellucci's isn't the lighting or the music, it's the way people lower their voices without realizing it. Like the air itself is watching, and I was just a waitress trying not to drop anything, trying not to be seen, trying to survive another 12-hour shift in shoes that pinched my toes and a smile that never quite reached my eyes. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 23, and I had exactly $42 in my checking account that morning. My mom's medication sat in a paper bag on our kitchen counter waiting for a refill I couldn't afford yet. So I showed up, tied my apron tight, and told myself to keep my head down, just like always. But nights like that don't let you stay invisible. Not when the wrong person walks through the door. I saw him before I heard him, because my body remembered before my mind did. The way my shoulders stiffened, the way my breath caught halfway in my throat. Jason, he smiled like nothing had ever happened, like he hadn't spent months turning my life into something I had to escape from, like I hadn't changed my number twice and blocked him everywhere I could think of. He slid into a table near the back like he owned the place, like he owned me, and I felt it, that old weight pressing down on my chest. Hey, Em, he said when I approached with a tray in my hands, and my fingers tightened so hard around the glass I thought it might crack. Miss me? I forced a smile because that's what you do when you're working for tips and survival. What can I get you tonight? My voice sounded steady, but my heartbeat was loud enough to drown out the music. He leaned closer, too close, his voice dropping just enough that only I could hear. You can start by not pretending you don't know me. And there it was, that shift, subtle but sharp, the warning underneath the words. I nodded, wrote down his order, stepped back. But he didn't let go. Not completely. His fingers brushed my wrist as I turned. Just enough pressure to remind me he could. Just enough to make my stomach twist. And still, no one said anything. Not the other servers, not the manager, not the guests sipping wine under golden lights. Because people don't get involved. Not when it looks like a personal problem. Not when it's easier to look away. So I kept moving, table to table, breath in, breath out, until I reached the corner of the room where everything felt different, quieter, heavier. That's where he sat, Dominic Russo. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew what he was the second I saw him. Some people don't need introductions. They carry something in the way they sit, the way the space around them adjusts. He wasn't loud, wasn't laughing, wasn't even looking at anyone. Just a man in a perfectly tailored suit, fingers resting lightly against a glass of dark liquid, like he had all the time in the world. And somehow that was more intimidating than anything else in the room. I should have kept walking, should have done what I always do, stay invisible, stay out of it. But then, Jason's voice cut through the noise again, sharper this time, closer. Don't ignore me, Emily. And when I turned, he was already standing, already stepping into my space like boundaries were suggestions he didn't believe in. My pulse spiked, my hands started to shake. And that's when it hit me, clear and cold. If I walked out with him, if I let him follow me after my shift, there wouldn't be anyone to pretend not to see. There wouldn't be lights or people or noise, just me and him and everything I had worked so hard to get away from. I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't. But I also knew I couldn't fight him. Not here, not like this. So I did the only thing I could think of, something small, something quiet, something that felt like nothing and everything at the same time. I grabbed the nearest bottle of red wine, walked straight to the corner table, and before I could stop myself, before I could think about consequences or cost or anything else, I tipped it just enough for the liquid to spill across the pristine white of his shirt. The room froze. Conversations cut off mid-sentence, and for the first time that night, every eye turned to me. My breath caught as I looked up, straight into his eyes, dark, unreadable, focused entirely on me now, not angry, not surprised, just aware, like he understood there was more to this than a clumsy mistake. My voice barely made it past my lips as I leaned in, close enough that no one else could hear. Please, I whispered. If I walk out, he won't let me leave. And for a second that felt like forever. Nothing moved. Not the air, not the people, not even me. And then he set his glass down, slow, deliberate, and stood up, and somehow, without raising his voice, without making a scene, the entire room seemed to shift around him, like something had just been decided that no one else was allowed to question. He did not look at the stain on his shirt, not at the wine spreading slowly across white fabric like it meant nothing. He looked at me, and that was worse, because it felt like being seen all the way through, like he could read every bad decision that had led me here and every fear I was trying to hide. His eyes did not soften. They sharpened, just slightly, like something had shifted into focus, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled. Who is he? Not a question, not really. More like a fact waiting to be confirmed. My throat tightened. I did not want to answer, did not want to make this real. But behind me, I could feel Jason's presence getting closer, like a storm you cannot outrun. My ex. I whispered, and for the first time that night, I hated how small my voice sounded. His gaze flicked past me for less than a second, just enough to locate the threat, just enough to understand the situation. Then back to me. Did you come here for help? He asked, and something in the way he said it made my chest ache, because no one had ever asked me that before. Not like it mattered, not like my answer could change anything. I swallowed hard, my hands still shaking. I did not know who else would listen, I admitted, and there it was, the truth laid bare between us, simple and terrifying. For a moment he said nothing, just studied me like he was weighing something invisible, like my fear had value he needed to measure. Then he nodded once, barely noticeable but final, like a decision had been made. Stand behind me, he said, not loud, not forceful. But there was no room for hesitation in his tone. My feet moved before my brain caught up, stepping back, placing him between me and everything I was trying to escape. And that was when Jason's voice cut through the silence, sharp and annoyed. Hey, what is this? He said, stepping forward, trying to laugh it off like a joke, like he was still in control. She is just clumsy. We are leaving. His hand reached for me again, but it stopped midair, not because someone grabbed him, not because anyone raised their voice, but because Dominic simply turned his head slightly, just enough, and suddenly the entire space shifted. The servers froze. The manager stopped mid-step. Even the background music seemed quieter, like the room itself was paying attention now. Dominic did not raise his voice. He did not need to. She is not going anywhere with you, he said, calm, steady, like stating the weather. Jason blinked, confused, then irritated. And who exactly are you supposed to be? He snapped, and I felt my stomach drop, because that was the wrong question. The kind of question that did not get answered with words. Dominic's expression did not change, but something colder settled behind his eyes, something that made my skin prickle. He took a single step forward, not aggressive, not rushed, just enough to close the distance. And somehow that was enough. Jason's confidence faltered, just for a second, but I saw it. I felt it. That tiny crack in the control he always held over me. I am the one telling you to leave, Dominic replied, still calm, still measured. But now there was something underneath it, something absolute, the kind of authority that did not need explanation. Around us, people were pretending not to watch, but I could feel it. Every eye, every breath held just a little too tight. Jason laughed, but it sounded forced, thin. This is none of your business, he said, trying to recover, trying to pull the situation back into something he understood, something he could dominate. But Dominic did not move, did not argue, did not escalate. He simply stood there, steady as stone. And for the first time since I had met Jason, I saw him hesitate, not because he wanted to, but because something in front of him did not bend, did not react the way he expected. And that uncertainty was enough. It always is. The silence stretched, heavy, thick, and then Dominic spoke again, softer this time, but somehow even more final. You are done here. 3 words, that was all. No threat, no raised voice, just certainty, and something in Jason's posture shifted, subtle, almost invisible, but real. His shoulders tensed, his jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he would push back, thought he would test it. But then he looked around, really looked, and saw what I had not noticed before. The way the staff stood a little straighter, the way 2 men near the entrance had gone completely still, watching, waiting, and suddenly this was not just a restaurant anymore, not just a normal night. It was something else, something bigger, and he understood that too. I saw it in his eyes, that flicker of calculation, of doubt. And then he stepped back, just 1 step, but it felt like the ground shifting beneath my feet. This is not over, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. And then he turned, walking toward the exit with a stiffness that betrayed how much he hated it, how much it cost him to leave without getting what he wanted. The door closed behind him, and the tension in the room did not disappear. It unraveled slowly, like everyone was remembering how to breathe again. But I was still standing there, frozen, my heart racing, my hands trembling. Because the danger was not gone, it had just changed shape, and when I looked back at Dominic, I realized something that made my breath catch all over again. I had not escaped anything. I had just stepped into a different kind of power, and I did not know yet if that was safer or more dangerous. I thought the worst part would be over once Jason walked out, but fear does not leave that quickly. It lingers in your chest, in your hands, in the way your eyes keep darting to the door like it might open again at any second. And I was still standing there behind him, behind Dominic, like I had forgotten how to move on my own. The restaurant slowly returning to life around us, glasses clinking again, low conversations picking back up. But softer now, more careful, like everyone had just been reminded of something they preferred not to understand. And I realized I was still gripping the edge of my tray so tightly my knuckles had gone white. "Breathe," he said quietly, not turning around. And it startled me because I had not realized he was paying attention to that too. To me, I forced a breath in, then another, my chest tight, uneven. "I am fine," I said automatically, the lie slipping out of me the way it always did. Easy. Practiced. But he turned then, just slightly, enough that I had to meet his eyes again. And there was no anger there about the wine, no irritation about the interruption, just something steady, something that made it impossible to hide behind that word. "No, you are not," he said, simple, certain, and I looked away first because I could not hold that kind of truth for too long. "Thank you," I managed instead, my voice quieter now, stripped of the forced brightness I used for customers. "You did not have to do that." He studied me for a moment like he was deciding whether to respond to that or not. Then he reached for a linen napkin from the table and handed it to me, not touching my hand, just offering it, controlled even in something that small. "You made it my business," he said, and the words landed heavier than I expected, not possessive, not demanding, just matter of fact, like a line had been crossed and could not be undone. I hesitated before taking the napkin, my fingers brushing the edge of it carefully, like even that distance mattered. "I am sorry about your shirt," I added, glancing at the stain, because it felt safer to talk about something normal, something fixable. He glanced down at it for the first time, then back at me, unconcerned. "It will be replaced," he said, dismissing it with a slight movement of his shoulder, like it had never mattered at all. And that contrast hit me harder than anything else, because for me, something like that would have meant a week of stress, of calculating how to cover the cost, and for him, it was nothing, just another thing that could be erased. "Emily," he said then, and my head snapped up because I had not told him my name. Not out loud. Not tonight. "How do you know that?" I asked before I could stop myself, and for the first time, there was the faintest shift in his expression, not quite a smile, but something close to it, like he was used to knowing things he was not told. "You wear a name tag," he replied, and I felt heat rise to my face, embarrassed, relieved, and unsettled all at once, because that meant he had been looking before, even if I had not noticed. "Right," I murmured, my voice softer, and for a moment, neither of us spoke, the space between us filled with something I could not quite define, not silence exactly, more like awareness, like the moment before a decision is made. "He will come back," Dominic said suddenly, and the words sent a chill down my spine because I knew he was right. Jason was not the kind of person who let things go, not when he thought something belonged to him. "I know," I admitted, my grip tightening on the napkin. "He always does." I did not realize how tired I sounded until I heard it out loud. The weight of it, the inevitability. Dominic's gaze did not soften, but it sharpened again, focusing on something beyond me, something ahead. "Then you will not leave alone tonight," he said, not a suggestion, not a question, just a statement. And something in me resisted immediately, instinctively, because accepting help had always come with a cost, always meant giving something back, something I could not afford to lose. "I cannot ask you for more than you have already done," I said quickly, stepping back half an inch, creating space where I could breathe. "You are not asking," he replied, just as quickly, his tone unchanged, steady. And that stopped me, because he was right. I had not asked, not directly, but I had still reached for him, still chosen him in that moment. And now I was standing in the consequences of that choice. Why? I asked before I could stop myself. The words slipping out raw, unfiltered. Why help me? His eyes held mine again, unflinching, and for a second I thought he might not answer, might dismiss it the way he had dismissed everything else. But then he spoke, quieter this time, almost thoughtful. Because you did not scream, he said, and I frowned slightly, confused. Most people panic, he continued, his voice low, controlled. They make noise, they draw attention, they lose control. You did not. You chose your moment, and you chose carefully. I stared at him, my heart skipping in a way that had nothing to do with fear this time, because no one had ever described me like that before, not as someone who chose, not as someone who had control. I was just trying to get out, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, and he shook his head once, small, precise. You were trying to survive, he corrected, and something about the way he said it made my chest tighten again, but differently now, like something inside me had been acknowledged for the first time, not dismissed, not minimized, just seen. And that was more dangerous than anything Jason had ever done, because it made me want to trust it, just a little. Finish your shift, he said after a moment, stepping back slightly, creating distance this time. I will be here when you are done. And the certainty in his voice left no room for doubt, no room for argument. And as I stood there, watching him return to his seat like nothing had happened, like the entire night had not just shifted on its axis, I realized something that made my pulse quicken all over again. I had walked into this job thinking I needed to survive one more night. But now, I was not sure what I was stepping into when the night ended. I tried to focus on the rest of my shift, but it felt like my body had forgotten how to go back to normal. Every step slightly off, every movement too aware, like I was walking through a version of the room that looked the same, but was not. My hands still remembered the way they had shaken, my chest still held that tight, lingering pressure that would not fully fade. And no matter how many tables I served, or how many polite smiles I forced, I could feel it, his presence in the corner of the room, steady, unchanging, like a fixed point. Everything else moved around. I did not look at him again, not directly, but I knew he was there. The same way you know when someone is watching without needing to confirm it. The minutes stretched longer than usual, each one dragging just enough to make me aware of it, until finally the clock above the bar clicked past midnight and the last of the dinner rush began to thin out. Conversations softened, chairs scraped lightly against polished floors, and one by one, people started to leave. I wiped down my last table slower than necessary, buying time I did not understand, because part of me wanted the night to end, wanted to walk out and breathe fresh air and pretend this had never happened. And another part of me was not ready for what came next, because stepping outside meant facing whatever waited beyond those doors. And for the first time, I did not know which was worse, staying or leaving. You are off, right? My coworker Mia asked as she passed by, her voice casual, but her eyes searching, like she had seen enough to know something was wrong, but not enough to understand what. Yeah, I said, forcing a small smile. Just finishing up. She hesitated for a second, then nodded and moved on, and I was grateful for that, for not having to explain something I barely understood myself. I untied my apron slowly, folding it with careful hands, placing it on the counter like it mattered more than it did. Anything to delay the moment I had to turn around. But eventually there was nothing left to do, no more excuses to stay busy, and I felt it again, that quiet awareness, pulling me back. I turned, and he was already standing, like he had known the exact second I would be done, like he had been waiting without impatience, just certainty. Dominic adjusted his jacket slightly, the faint stain from earlier barely visible now under the dim lighting, and for a moment I wondered if anything about him could ever look out of place. Ready? He asked, not demanding, not assuming, just offering the question like it was mine to answer. My throat felt tight again, but I nodded, because staying was no longer an option. Yes, I said, my voice steadier than I expected, and that surprised me more than anything else. He did not reach for me, did not guide me. He simply turned toward the exit, and I followed, step by step, the distance between us deliberate, respectful, but unmistakably connected. The doors opened with a soft push. And the night air hit me instantly, cool and sharp, carrying the distant hum of the city, cars passing, voices echoing somewhere far enough away to feel safe. I drew in a breath, deeper this time, like my lungs had been waiting for it. The street outside was quieter than usual, the late hour thinning out the noise, leaving pockets of shadow between streetlights. And for a second, everything felt still, like the world was holding its breath again. I scanned the sidewalk without meaning to, my eyes searching for a familiar shape, a movement, anything that might signal trouble. But there was nothing, just empty space and the distant glow of headlights. "He is not here," Dominic said, and I realized he had noticed that too. My shoulders relaxed slightly, just enough to feel the difference. "He usually waits," I admitted, my voice lower now, more honest without the walls of the restaurant around me. Dominic glanced down the street, his gaze methodical, taking in details I could not even name, then back to me. "Not tonight," he said, and there was something in his tone that made me believe him, not because I understood why, but because he sounded like someone who did not guess, someone who knew. A black car pulled up to the curb then, smooth and quiet, like it had been there the entire time, and I had only just noticed it. The driver stepped out, opening the rear door without a word, and I froze for half a second. The reality of this moment settling over me. This was the point, where things changed, where I either stepped forward or walked away, and both felt irreversible in different ways. Dominic did not rush me, did not speak. He simply waited, giving me the space to choose, and that made it harder, not easier, because it meant this was mine, my decision, not something happening to me. I looked down at my hands, still holding the napkin he had given me, wrinkled now from how tightly I had been gripping it, then back up at him, his expression unreadable but present. "Solid. If I get in that car," I said slowly, the words forming carefully. "I cannot pretend this is just a normal night anymore." His eyes held mine, steady, unwavering. "It was never a normal night," he replied, and something about that settled into place inside me, quiet but certain, like a truth I had been avoiding finally catching up. I exhaled slowly, then stepped forward, one foot, then the other, closing the distance between who I was before and whatever came next. And as I slid into the seat, the door closing softly behind me, I realized something that made my heart beat just a little faster. I had asked for help, but I had no idea what kind of world had answered. The door closed with a soft, final click that echoed louder in my chest than it should have, sealing me inside a space that felt too quiet, too controlled, like the outside world had been turned down to a distant hum. I sat still for a second, my hand resting against the cool leather seat, grounding myself in something real as the car began to move, smooth and steady. No sudden motions, no rush, just a quiet glide through the city streets. I had never been in a car like this before, not because it was luxurious, but because of the way it felt, insulated, like nothing could touch it unless it was allowed. Dominic slid in beside me a moment later, the door closing with the same muted precision, and for a few seconds neither of us spoke, the silence stretching but not uncomfortable, just present, like it belonged here. I stared ahead, watching the reflection of streetlights flicker across the tinted window, each passing glow marking distance from the place I had just left behind, from the version of myself that had walked into that restaurant thinking she understood how the night would go. "Where do you live?" he asked finally, his voice low, calm, cutting cleanly through my thoughts. I hesitated, the answer sitting on the tip of my tongue, but not leaving my mouth right away. Giving someone your address is a small thing until it is not, until it means something more than directions, until it feels like handing over a piece of your life you cannot easily take back, he noticed. Of course he did, his gaze shifting slightly toward me without pressure, without demand, just awareness. "You do not have to tell me," he added, and that made it worse somehow, because now it was my choice again, not something being taken from me. I let out a slow breath. "Queens," I said, my voice quieter than before, "near 74th Street. He nodded once, like that was all he needed, and the car adjusted its route without a word from the driver. Like everything here moved on unspoken understanding. I watched that happen, the ease of it, and something about it made my chest tighten again. Not fear exactly, but the realization of how different this world was from mine, where nothing moved unless you pushed it, where every decision came with effort and consequence. "You are thinking," Too much, he said after a moment. Not accusing, just stating, and I let out a small breath that almost sounded like a laugh. I usually do, I admitted, glancing at him briefly before looking away again. It keeps me out of trouble. He considered that for a second, then shook his head slightly. No, he said, and the certainty in his voice caught my attention. It keeps you in it longer than you need to be. I frowned slightly, turning that over in my mind, because part of me wanted to argue, to defend the habits that had kept me safe this long. But another part of me knew he was not entirely wrong. Thinking had never stopped Jason before. It had only delayed the inevitable. The car slowed at a red light, the city stretching out around us in layers of light and shadow, and I realized my hands were no longer shaking. Not like before, not uncontrollably. There was still tension there, still awareness. But it was different now, steadier, like something had shifted inside me. You are. Not what I expected, I said before I could stop myself, the words slipping out without permission. He glanced at me, one eyebrow lifting slightly. And what did you expect? He asked, and I hesitated, because saying it out loud felt strange, like admitting something I had built in my head without realizing it. Someone louder, I said finally. Someone who makes it obvious. His expression did not change much, but there was the faintest hint of understanding in his eyes. Power does not need to be loud, he replied, and the simplicity of that statement settled into the space between us, heavy in a way I could not fully explain, because it was true in a way I had never seen before. Jason had always been loud, always pushing, always forcing, and yet he had felt so overwhelming, so inescapable. And Dominic, sitting beside me now, calm, controlled, barely raising his voice, felt like something entirely different, something that did not need to prove itself to be real. The light turned green, and the car moved again, smooth, uninterrupted. Are you afraid of me? He asked suddenly, and my breath caught, not because of the question itself, but because of how directly he said it. No hesitation, no attempt to soften it, just truth. I looked at him then, really looked at the stillness in his posture, the way his eyes held mine without pressure, without expectation, just waiting. I searched for the answer, not the easy one, not the automatic response, but the real one, and it took me a second longer than I expected. I do not know, I said honestly, and something in his gaze shifted, not disappointment, not approval, just acknowledgement, like that answer mattered more than anything else I could have said. Good, he replied quietly. And I blinked, surprised. Good. I repeated, unsure, and he nodded once. Fear makes people lie, he said. Uncertainty makes them pay attention. I let that settle, feeling the truth of it in the way my senses felt sharper now, more aware, more present, like I was noticing things I would have ignored before. The route we were taking, the turns, the timing, the way the driver never spoke unless necessary. Everything felt deliberate, intentional. We are almost there, he added after a moment. And I looked out the window, recognizing the streets now, the familiar buildings, the corner store with the flickering sign, the bus stop I passed every morning, and something in my chest eased just slightly, the comfort of something known after everything that had changed. The car slowed, then came to a stop in front of my building, the engine idling softly, and for a second, neither of us moved, the moment stretching again, but different this time. Quieter, more personal, like the night was. Not quite ready to end yet. I reached for the door handle, then paused, my hand hovering there as I glanced back at him, because there was one thing I needed to understand before I stepped out, before I went back to a life that suddenly felt smaller than it had a few hours ago. What happens now? I asked, and the question carried more than just the moment. It carried everything that had changed, everything I did not yet understand. Dominic held my gaze, steady, unreadable, and for a second I thought he might give me a simple answer, something clear, something easy, but instead, he said quietly, that depends on whether you pretend tonight never happened. And something in the way he said it made my heart beat just a little faster, because deep down, I already knew that pretending was no longer an option. I kept my hand on the door handle longer than necessary, feeling the cool metal under my fingers like it might anchor me to something certain, something simple, but nothing about this felt simple anymore. Not after everything that had shifted in the span of a few hours. I looked at him, really looked this time, trying to understand the man who had stepped into my life without warning and changed the direction of it with a few quiet words. And if I do not pretend, I asked slowly, my voice steady but softer than before. What happens then? He did not answer right away, his gaze steady, measuring, like he was deciding how much truth I was ready to hear, or maybe how much I was willing to accept. Then you stop being alone in this, he said finally, and the words landed deeper than I expected, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just certain, like he was offering something that did not come with conditions I could see yet, and that made it more unsettling, not less, because I had learned that nothing in life came without a cost, especially not something that sounded like safety. I swallowed, my fingers tightening slightly on the handle. And what does that cost me? I asked, because that mattered. It always mattered. His expression did not change, but there was a shift in his eyes, something sharper, more focused, like I had asked the right question. Attention, he said, and I blinked, caught off guard by how simple that sounded. That is all, he added, and something about that answer made my chest tighten again, because attention from someone like him did not feel small. It felt like standing under a spotlight you could not step out of once it turned on. I let out a slow breath, looking away for a second at the familiar outline of my building, the chipped paint on the front door, the flickering light above the entrance that had been broken for months. Everything about it felt smaller now, not in size, but in significance, like I was seeing it from a distance I had not noticed before. You make it sound easy, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. He shook his head once, subtle but firm. It is not easy, he corrected. It is simple. And that difference settled into me in a way I could not ignore. Simple did not mean safe. Simple did not mean without consequence. It just meant clear, and clarity was something I had avoided for a long time because it forced decisions I was not ready to make. I exhaled slowly, then pushed the door open, the night air rushing in again. Cooler now, sharper against my skin. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, my shoes hitting concrete that felt more solid than anything else had all night, grounding me for a second. But I did not close the door right away. Something held me there, suspended between leaving and staying. Why me? I asked, turning back slightly, because that question had been sitting in my chest since the moment he stood up in that restaurant. Heavier than everything else, he met my gaze without hesitation. Because you chose, he said, and I frowned slightly, not understanding. People like you, he continued, his voice calm, measured. They wait, they hope things will change. They tell themselves stories about why it will be different next time. But you did not wait tonight. You acted. I felt something shift inside me at those words, something uncomfortable and unfamiliar, because I had never thought of myself that way, never seen that moment as anything more than desperation. I was scared. I admitted, my voice quieter now, stripped down to something real. You were, he agreed, and there was no judgment in it, no dismissal, just acknowledgement. And you acted anyway, he added, and for a second, I did not know what to say to that because it felt like he was describing someone else, someone stronger, someone I did not recognize. I looked down at my hands again, still holding the napkin, now wrinkled beyond use, then back up at him. And that matters to you, I said, more statement than question. He nodded once. Does? And the simplicity of that answer made it harder to dismiss, harder to ignore, because it did not come with explanation or justification, just truth. I stepped back fully then, creating space between us, the car door still open beside me, the quiet hum of the engine filling the silence. I do not know what this is, I said, my voice steady but honest, and I do not know if I should trust it. His gaze did not waver, did not push, did not pull, just remained, solid and present. You should not trust it, he said, and that surprised me more than anything else he had said tonight. I blinked, caught off guard. Then why? I started, but he cut in gently, not interrupting, just finishing the thought. You should pay attention, he said, and there it was again, that word, that concept, not trust, not surrender, just awareness, and something about that felt different, safer in a way I could not fully explain, because it did not ask me to give anything up, just to see clearly. I nodded slowly, not because I fully understood, but because part of me did, enough to feel the shift happening inside me. Good night, Dominic, I said, the name feeling unfamiliar on my tongue but not wrong. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging it without comment. "Good night, Emily," he replied, and there was something in the way he said my name that made it feel heavier, more significant than it had before. I closed the door then, the sound soft but final, and the car pulled away a second later, disappearing down the street with the same quiet precision it had arrived with. I stood there for a moment, watching until it was gone, the night settling back into something that looked normal again, but did not feel like it anymore. And as I turned toward my building, reaching for the door I had opened 1,000 times before, I realized something that made my heartbeat steady instead of race. I was not the same person who had walked into that restaurant, and for the first time, that did not scare me as much as it should have. Sleep did not come easily that night. It never does when your life shifts without asking permission. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside, my window, and the occasional creak of the old pipes in the walls. Everything familiar, everything the same, and yet none of it felt quite right anymore. Like I had stepped back into a place that still fit my body but not my mind. My thoughts kept circling the same moments. The way he had stood up without hesitation, the way the entire room had changed around him, the way he had looked at me like I was not invisible, not small, not something to be overlooked. And that was the part that unsettled me the most. Not the power, not the control, but the attention, because attention meant being seen, and being seen meant I could not pretend anymore. I turned onto my side, pulling the thin blanket tighter around me, trying to ground myself in something physical, something simple, but even that felt different, like the air itself carried a new weight, a new awareness. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale, each exhale, the way I had taught myself to do when things felt too overwhelming. And eventually, somewhere between one thought and the next, exhaustion pulled me under. The morning came too quickly, sunlight slipping through the thin curtains and landing across my face, warm but unforgiving. I blinked awake, disoriented for a second before everything came rushing back. The restaurant, Jason, Dominic, the car, the conversation, all of it settling into place like pieces of a puzzle I had not agreed to solve. I sat up slowly, my body heavy from lack of real rest, my mind already moving faster than I could keep up with. For a moment I considered calling in sick, staying in bed, pretending none of it had happened, but that option felt weaker than it used to, less convincing, like I already knew it would not change anything. I pushed myself out of bed instead, moving through my morning routine on autopilot, brushing my teeth, pulling my hair back, getting dressed in the same simple clothes I always wore, but even those felt different now, like they belonged to a version of me that had not yet made a choice. The apartment was quiet, my mom still asleep in the next room, the soft rhythm of her breathing the only sound. I paused at her door for a second, watching her, reminding myself why I kept going, why I endured things I should not have to. And for the first time, the thought crossed my mind that maybe enduring was not the only option. Maybe there was something else, something I had not considered before. I shook that thought away, not ready to hold on to it yet, not ready to let it change anything too quickly. The day passed in fragments, small moments that felt disconnected from each other, like I was moving through it without fully being there, every sound a little sharper, every glance a little heavier. I caught myself checking over my shoulder more than usual, scanning for Jason without meaning to, but he did not appear, not on the street, not near the bus stop, not anywhere I looked. And that absence was its own kind of tension, because it did not feel like safety. It felt like waiting, like something was building just out of sight. By the time my shift started that evening, the familiar weight of the restaurant settled over me again, the lights, the noise, the constant movement. But this time it did not feel the same. I noticed things I had ignored before, the way certain customers were greeted differently, the way some tables were given more attention without explanation, the subtle hierarchy that existed beneath the surface, and I wondered how much of it I had missed simply because I had been too focused on surviving to observe. I tied my apron slowly, my fingers steady, more deliberate than the night before, and as I stepped onto the floor, I felt it again, that shift inside me, quiet but undeniable, like I was no longer just reacting to what happened around me. I was watching, paying attention. The way he had said, the hours passed, not quickly, but not painfully either, just steady, controlled, until the door opened and the air in the room changed, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough that I felt it before I saw him. My breath caught for a fraction of a second, my body recognizing the presence before my eyes confirmed it. Dominic walked in like he had never left, like this was just another night, another routine, but nothing about it felt routine to me. Not anymore. My heart did not race the way it had before. It did not drop into panic. It steadied, focused, like I was preparing for something I could not yet define. He did not look at me immediately, did not acknowledge me in any obvious way, but I knew he was aware. I knew he had seen me the moment he stepped inside, and somehow that was enough. I took a breath, adjusted my posture, and stepped forward, not hiding, not avoiding, just moving. And for the first time, I realized something that changed everything. I was not waiting for something to happen to me anymore. I was choosing how to step into it. The moment he stepped inside, the room adjusted again, not dramatically, not in a way most people would notice, but I did, because now I knew what to look for. The slight pause and movement near the entrance, the way the host straightened just a little faster, the subtle shift in attention that followed him like a quiet ripple. And this time, I did not shrink from it. I did not look away. I let myself see it fully, understand it. Dominic moved through the space with the same controlled ease as the night before, not acknowledging anyone beyond what was necessary, but commanding the room without trying, and I felt it again, that strange steadiness in my chest instead of fear, like something inside me had recalibrated overnight. I picked up a tray, my fingers firm, not trembling, and stepped toward his table before I could second-guess myself. Because this time, I was not reacting, I was choosing. He was seated by the time I reached him, his posture relaxed but precise, one arm resting lightly against the table, his gaze shifting to me the moment I stopped in front of him. And there was no surprise in his expression, just recognition, like this had always been expected. "Good evening," I said, my voice even, not forced, and I realized as I spoke that I was not pretending anymore, not performing the way I usually did. I was just speaking. He studied me for a brief second, his eyes sharper than before, assessing something I could not fully name. Then he inclined his head. Slightly. "Emily," he replied, my name landing differently again, heavier, more deliberate, like it carried meaning now. I nodded once, acknowledging it, then glanced at the table, giving myself a moment to breathe. "Would you like your usual?" I asked, though I did not know if he even had one. But it felt like the right thing to say, like stepping into a rhythm instead of waiting to be guided. There was the faintest shift at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but something close. "You are assuming I have one," he said, his tone neutral but not dismissive. I met his gaze again, steady this time. "You seem like someone who does not leave things to chance," I replied before I could stop myself, and the words surprised me as much as they seemed to interest him. There was a pause, brief but noticeable, like I had said something worth considering. Then he leaned back slightly, his attention still fixed on me. "Water," he said simply. "And something you would choose." I blinked, caught off guard. "Me," I repeated, unsure I had heard correctly. He nodded once. "You are paying attention now," he said, and I felt a small shift in my chest at those words, because he was right. I was, in a way I had not been before. I hesitated for a second, then nodded, accepting the choice he had just placed in my hands. And as I turned to walk away, I realized how different that felt. Not like pressure, not like a test I would fail, but like an opportunity to step forward instead of shrinking back. I moved through the kitchen with a clarity I had not felt in a long time, selecting the drink carefully, considering what would fit, what would match the quiet control he carried. Not overthinking, just deciding. And when I returned, placing the glass in front of him, my hands were steady, my movements deliberate. He glanced at it briefly, then back at me, and there was something in his expression that told me I had not misstepped. "Not this time." "Sit," he said then, and the word stopped me mid-motion, my breath catching slightly, not from fear, but from the unexpected shift in roles. I glanced around instinctively, aware of the rules, the expectations, the invisible lines I was not supposed to cross. "I am working," I said quietly. More reflex than refusal. His gaze did not waver. "For 1 minute," he replied, and there was no force in it, no demand, just a calm certainty that made it feel less like a command and more like a space being offered. I hesitated, then slowly, carefully, I pulled the chair out just enough to sit on the edge of it, my posture straight, my awareness sharp, like I was stepping into something I did not fully understand yet. "You are different tonight," he said after a moment, his voice lower now. "Meant only for me." I exhaled slowly, considering that. "I am trying to be," I admitted, because that felt closer to the truth than anything else. He studied me again, longer this time, like he was measuring that statement against something internal, something I could not see. "Good," he said finally, and there was that word again, simple, but carrying weight. I glanced down at my hands briefly, then back up at him. I did not pretend. I added, the words coming out softer, more personal, and something in his gaze shifted again, a fraction, but enough that I noticed. "No," he agreed. "You did not." And for a second, the space between us felt different, less like a divide and more like a connection, subtle but undeniable. I became aware of the room again then, of the other tables, the movement, the expectations pulling at me from all directions. "I should get back," I said quietly, and this time it was not avoidance. It was acknowledgement of where I was, of what still needed to be done. He nodded once, accepting it without question. "We will talk later," he said, not as a request, but as something already decided. And as I stood, stepping back into the flow of the restaurant, I felt it again, that shift, that awareness, that sense that I was no longer just passing through moments, I was shaping them. And for the first time, I realized something that made my pulse steady instead of quicken. I was not just surviving this night, I was beginning to understand it. The rest of the shift moved differently after that. Not faster, not easier, but clearer, like every motion had intention behind it now. I carried plates, refilled glasses, took orders, but I was aware of everything in a way I had never been before. The distance between tables, the tone of voices, the way certain people avoided eye contact while others demanded it. And through all of it, I could feel him there. Not watching constantly, not hovering, just present, like a steady point I could return to without needing to look. And that changed something in me. It gave me space to breathe without shrinking, to move without constantly calculating how to disappear. But that did not mean the tension was gone. It had just shifted, settled into something quieter, but no less real, because absence does not mean safety. It just means waiting, and I felt that too, in the back of my mind, like a thread I could not quite pull free. Jason had not shown up again, not yet, but I knew him well enough to understand that silence was not surrender. It was strategy, it was regrouping, and that thought stayed with me even as the hours passed, even as the restaurant filled and emptied and filled again, until the moment everything changed again, not loudly, not suddenly, but in a way that made my skin prickle before I understood why. The door opened, just like it had dozens of times that night, but something about it felt different. The air shifted, subtle but undeniable, and I turned without meaning to, my gaze drawn to the entrance by instinct alone. And there he was, not stepping fully inside, not making a scene, just standing there for a second too long, his eyes scanning the room until they found me, and my breath caught, not in panic, not the way it had before, but in recognition, in awareness. Jason, he did not smile this time, did not pretend. The mask he wore in public had slipped just enough for me to see what was underneath, something sharper, something more controlled. And that was worse, because it meant he was not reacting anymore. He was planning. I felt it immediately, the tension coiling in my chest, the instinct to step back, to retreat, but I did not move, not right away, because I remembered what had happened the last time I acted without thinking, and this time, I was paying attention. I shifted my weight slightly, my hands steady even as my pulse picked up, and I did the only thing that made sense now. I looked toward Dominic, obviously, not in a way that would draw attention, just enough to confirm what I already knew. He had seen him too. Of course he had. His posture had not changed. His expression remained the same, calm, unreadable, but there was something in his stillness that told me everything I needed to know. He was aware, and more importantly, he was ready. I exhaled slowly, grounding myself in that knowledge, not relying on it, not hiding behind it, just acknowledging it as part of the moment. Jason took a step inside then, slow, deliberate, like he was testing the space, like he was deciding how far he could push before something pushed back. The room did not react the way it had before, not yet. Most people did not notice. Or chose not to, but I did. And so did Dominic. And that was enough. I turned back to my table, finishing what I was doing with controlled movements, not rushing, not freezing, just continuing. Because stopping would draw attention, and attention was something I had learned to manage, not fear. When I moved again, it was intentional, not away from him, not toward him, just steady, my breathing even, my steps measured. But I could feel his gaze tracking me now, heavier than before, more focused. And that was the moment I understood something I had not before. This was not about chasing anymore. It was about control, about who held it and who did not. And for the first time, I realized I had a say in that. Even if it was small, even if it was just in how I chose to stand, to move, to respond. I reached the edge of the room, placing a glass down with careful precision, and then I turned, not quickly, not nervously, just enough to face the direction I had been avoiding. Jason was closer. Now, not at my table, not yet, but closer than before, his path deliberate, his eyes fixed, and I felt it, that familiar pressure building, the old instinct to shrink, to apologize, to make things easier for him. But it did not take over the way it used to, because now there was something else there too, something new, something steadier. I held his gaze for half a second longer than I ever would have before, not challenging, not provoking, just present. And that was enough to make him pause. Just slightly, just long enough for the balance to shift in a way only I seemed to notice. And then, from the corner of my vision, I saw Dominic stand, not rushed, not reactive, just rising with the same controlled precision as before. And in that moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath again, and I realized something that changed everything. This was no longer about who I was trying to escape. It was about who I was choosing to stand beside. Time did not slow down. It sharpened, every second cutting cleaner, clearer, like the world had narrowed to a single line I could not step away from. Jason stopped a few feet in front of me, not close enough to touch, not yet, but close enough that I could feel the tension in the space between us. His eyes moved over me quickly, assessing, measuring, like he was trying to understand what had changed, and I knew he saw it. Even if he could not name it, I was not shrinking, not looking down, not stepping back the way I always had before, and that unsettled him more than anything I could have said. "You are different," he said, his voice lower now, controlled in a way that made it more dangerous than when he used to raise it. I held his gaze, steady, not challenging, just present. "I am paying attention," I replied, the words coming out clearer than I expected, and for a second, something flickered across his face, irritation, confusion, something sharp and unfamiliar. He took a step closer, testing the boundary again. But this time, I did not move. My hands remained still at my sides, my breathing even. And that was when I felt it, not behind me, not distant, but beside me. Dominic. He did not rush, did not insert himself dramatically. He simply stepped into the space next to me like he had always been meant to stand there. His presence quiet but undeniable, and the shift was immediate. Not loud, not visible to everyone, but absolute. Jason's attention snapped to him, his posture tightening just slightly, like something in his instincts had recognized a force he could not easily push through. Dominic did not look at him right away. His gaze remained forward for a fraction of a second longer, as if giving the moment time to settle. Then he turned his head just enough, his expression calm, unreadable. "You should leave," he said, and it was not a threat, not a warning. Just a statement delivered with a certainty that did not invite argument. Jason let out a short breath that might have been a laugh, but it did not carry any humor. "This does not concern you," he replied, his tone sharper now, trying to regain ground, trying to pull the moment back into something he understood. But Dominic did not react, did not rise to it. He simply remained where he was, steady, unmoved. "It does," he said quietly, and there was something in those two words that made the air feel heavier, like they carried weight beyond what was being said. Jason glanced at me then, like he was recalculating, like he was trying to decide if I was still part of the equation he knew how to control. But I did not look away, did not soften, and that was the second shift, smaller than the first, but just as important, because it removed something he had always relied on, my silence, my compliance. "You think this changes anything?" he said, his voice dropping. More controlled now, more dangerous in its restraint. I felt the old fear stir at the edges of my chest, familiar, instinctive, but it did not take over the way it used to, because I was not standing there alone anymore. Not physically, not mentally, not the way I had before. It already has, I said, and the truth of it settled into the space between us before either of them could respond. Jason's jaw tightened, his gaze flicking between the two of us, and for a moment, I saw it, that crack again, that uncertainty he could not fully hide, because this was not the dynamic he was used to, not the pattern he knew how to control. Dominic stepped forward then, not aggressively, not closing the space entirely, just enough to shift the balance again, to make the distance feel different. "You will not come back here," he said, his tone unchanged, calm, precise, but final in a way that did not need emphasis. Jason's eyes narrowed slightly, like he wanted to argue, wanted to push, but something held him back. Something in the way Dominic stood, in the way the room had gone. Just a little too quiet again. In the way even the people who were pretending not to watch had stopped moving just enough to notice. And that was when I understood it fully. Power was not in what you said. It was in what did not need to be said. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy with everything unspoken, everything understood without explanation. Jason exhaled slowly, his shoulders tense, his expression tight. And for a second, I thought he might test it anyway, might take that final step just to prove he could. But then he looked at me one more time, really looked, like he was trying to memorize something, or maybe trying to understand something he could not control anymore. "This is not over," he said, quieter now, not a threat, not quite, more like a statement he needed to believe. And then he stepped back, one step, then another, the distance growing between us in a way that felt different this time. Not temporary, not uncertain, but real. He turned without another word and walked out, the door closing behind him with a soft sound that echoed louder than it should have. The tension in the room did not disappear immediately, it unraveled slowly. Like everyone was remembering how to move again, how to speak, how to exist without holding their breath. And I stood there, my heart steady, my hands still, my mind clear in a way it had not been before. Dominic did not look at me right away. He remained still for a second longer, like he was ensuring the moment had truly passed. Then he turned slightly, his gaze meeting mine, and there was no question in it, no doubt, just acknowledgement, like he had seen exactly what I had done, what I had chosen, and understood it completely. "You did not step back," he said, and it was not praise, not approval, just truth. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of that settle into me. Not heavy, not overwhelming, just solid. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "I did not." And for the first time, that felt like something I could carry forward, not just survive through. The room slowly returned to its rhythm, but it was not the same rhythm as before. It was quieter, more aware, like something invisible had shifted beneath the surface, and everyone could feel it even if they could not explain it. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, letting the silence settle inside me. Not the heavy kind from before, not the kind that pressed down and made me feel small, but something steadier, something that felt like space instead of pressure, like I could finally breathe without waiting for the next interruption. Dominic moved first, not away, not abruptly, just a small step back that gave the moment room to close naturally. His presence still there, but no longer shielding me directly, and that mattered, because it meant I was not hiding behind him. I was standing on my own again, just differently. I became aware of the room again in pieces, the soft clink of glasses, the low murmur of voices picking back up, the manager pretending everything had been normal all along. And I realized something that almost made me smile. Nothing had been normal, not for me, not anymore. "Emily," Dominic said quietly, and I turned to him without hesitation this time. Not startled, not unsure, just present. "Yes," I replied, my voice calm, matching the steadiness I felt inside. He studied me for a brief moment, not evaluating, not questioning, just observing, like he was confirming something he had already decided. "Walk with me," he said, and there was no urgency in it, no command, just a direction offered with quiet certainty. I nodded once, not because I had to, but because I chose to, and that difference mattered more than anything else. I moved beside him, not behind, not trailing, just aligned, and as we walked through the restaurant, I noticed how the space adjusted again, subtle but real, people stepping slightly aside, conversations dipping just enough to acknowledge his presence. But this time, I was part of that movement, part of that shift, and it did not feel overwhelming. It felt clarifying, like I was seeing the structure of something I had never noticed before. We stopped near the edge of the room, where the light was softer, the noise lower, a place that felt separate without being hidden, and for a moment neither of us spoke, the quiet stretching between us in a way that did not demand to be filled. "You understood the moment," he said finally, his voice low, measured, and I felt a small shift in my chest at those words, because they were not praise, not approval, just recognition, and somehow that meant more. I exhaled slowly, considering that. "I think I am starting to," I admitted, the honesty of it surprising me less now than it would have before. He nodded once, like that was enough, like that was exactly what he expected. "Most people wait to be told what to do," he continued, his gaze steady on mine. "You did not." I held his gaze, not flinching, not looking away, because I understood what he was saying now, not just hearing it. "I used to," I said quietly, and that felt like the most important part of it. Not what I had done tonight, but what I had stopped doing. He did not respond immediately, just watched me for a second longer, like he was measuring the weight of that statement. Then he inclined his head slightly, acknowledging it without needing to say more. "That changes things," he said, and the simplicity of it made it feel more real, more permanent. I nodded, feeling that truth settle into me, not as something heavy, but as something solid, something I could stand on instead of something I had to carry. "It does," I agreed, and for a moment, the world felt quieter, not in sound, but in pressure, like I was no longer bracing against something that had not even happened yet. Dominic's gaze shifted briefly toward the door Jason had exited through, then back to me, and there was something in that movement that told me he was already thinking ahead, already considering what came next, not reacting, not waiting, just planning. "He will test this again," he said, not as a warning, not as a threat, just a fact. And I felt that truth immediately, not as fear, but as understanding, because I knew it too. I had always known it. I just had not known what to do with it before. "I know," I said, my voice steady. And for the first time, those words did not feel like resignation. They felt like awareness, like preparation. He studied me for a moment, then nodded once, satisfied, like that answer mattered, like it told him what he needed to know. "Then you will be ready," he said. And there was no doubt in his tone, no hesitation, just certainty, and something about that settled into me in a way I could not ignore, not because he said it, but because part of me believed it. Maybe for the first time, I drew in a slow breath, letting that feeling expand instead of pushing it away. "I will be," I replied, and the words felt different now, not like a promise I might break, but like a decision I had already made. Dominic's expression did not change much, but there was the faintest shift in his eyes, something that looked like approval, or maybe just recognition again. And then he stepped back slightly, giving me space, not pulling me in, not holding me there, just allowing the moment to settle on its own. "Finish your shift," he said, his tone returning to that calm neutrality that made everything feel controlled. "We will speak after." I nodded, understanding now that this was not an ending, not even close, just another point in something that was still unfolding. I turned then, stepping back into the flow of the restaurant. But this time, it felt different, not like I was being carried by it, but like I was moving through it with intention, with awareness. And as I picked up my tray, as I stepped toward my next table, I realized something that made my hands steadier than they had ever been before. I was not just reacting to the world anymore. I was beginning to decide how I existed in it, and that changed everything. The rest of the night did not explode into chaos the way I once would have expected. It unfolded, slowly, deliberately, like something being set into place piece by piece, and I moved through it with a kind of quiet focus that felt unfamiliar and yet completely natural. Every table I approached, every order I took, every step I made felt intentional, like I was no longer just filling space, I was occupying it. And that difference changed everything. I noticed how people responded to me now, not dramatically, not in ways anyone else would comment on, but in small shifts, subtle pauses, glances that lasted a fraction longer, like something in my posture, in the way I carried myself, had adjusted just enough to be felt, even if it was not understood, and through all of it, I was aware of him, not constantly looking, not checking, just knowing, like a presence I did not need to confirm to believe in. Dominic remained where he had been, steady, composed, not intervening, not directing, just there. And that mattered more than if he had hovered, because it meant this was not about dependence, it was about choice, mine. The hours passed, the restaurant slowly thinning out as the night deepened, the noise softening into something more manageable, until eventually the last of the guests began to leave, chairs sliding back, coats being gathered, quiet goodbyes exchanged, and the weight of the night started to lift, not completely, but enough to feel the difference. I wiped down my final table with slow, deliberate movements, not because I needed the time, but because I was aware of it, aware that something was about to shift again, not in danger, not in fear, but in direction. I untied my apron, folding it carefully, placing it where it belonged, the routine grounding me for a second before I turned. And when I did, he was already standing, just like the night before, as if he had been waiting not for the time, but for me to reach it. Our eyes met across the room, and this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just acknowledgement. I walked toward him without overthinking it, without questioning whether I should, because I already knew the answer. "You finished," he said, his voice calm, not asking, just noting. I nodded once, stopping a comfortable distance away, not too close, not too far. "I did," I replied, and there was something in the simplicity of that exchange that felt heavier than it should have, like it carried everything that had happened between then and now. He studied me for a moment, longer than before, not assessing, not measuring, just observing, like he was confirming something that had already been decided. And he added after a second, "You stayed." I felt a small shift in my chest at those words, because they were not about the shift, not about the job. They were about the choice, about not leaving, not avoiding, not retreating when it would have been easier to do so. I exhaled slowly. "I did," I said again. And this time it felt like a statement, not just an answer. He inclined his head, slightly, acknowledging it. And there was something in that small gesture that felt like recognition, not of what I had done, but of who I was becoming. "Walk," he said, turning toward the exit without waiting, not assuming I would follow, just moving with the same quiet certainty as always. And I did follow, not out of habit, not out of fear, but because I chose to, step by step, matching his pace, not trying to catch up, not falling behind, just aligned. The doors opened, the night air meeting us again. Cooler now, calmer, the city quieter than before, like it had settled into itself. The street was nearly empty, the glow of streetlights stretching across the pavement in long, soft lines, and for a moment, everything felt still, not tense, not waiting, just open. The car was already there, just like before, the driver stepping forward without a word, the door opening with practiced precision, and I paused for half a second, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness, because this moment was not the same as the last time. This was not about escaping something immediate. This was about stepping into something I was beginning to understand. "You are thinking again," he said quietly, and I glanced at him, a small smile almost forming before I could stop it. "I am paying attention," I corrected, and there was a brief shift in his expression, something subtle but unmistakable, like approval, or maybe just recognition again. He nodded once, accepting that without comment, and for a moment, neither of us moved, the space between us filled with something unspoken but clear. "You asked what happens next," he said then, his voice low, measured, and I felt my focus sharpen instantly, because I remembered that question, remembered the weight behind it. "Yes," I replied, steady. He looked at me directly, his gaze unwavering. "Now," he said, "you decide if this ends here." And the words settled into me with a clarity that made everything else fall away, because this was not about him. Not really. It was about me, about whether I would step back into the life I had known, into the patterns I had followed, or whether I would move forward into something uncertain but different, something that required more from me than just endurance. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of that choice, not heavy, not crushing, just real. And for the first time, I did not feel like I needed to rush it, like I needed to decide out of fear or urgency. I looked at him, at the steadiness in his posture, the quiet certainty in his presence, and then I looked at the open car door, at the path it represented, and I realized something that made my chest feel lighter instead of tighter. I was not being pulled into this. I was stepping into it. And that made all the difference. I met his gaze again, holding it for a second longer than before. "It does not end here," I said, my voice calm, clear, and certain in a way it had never been before. And as the words left my mouth, I understood something that changed everything. I was no longer just reacting to what happened to me. I was choosing what came next. The words settled between us like something final and something beginning at the same time. Not loud, not dramatic, just irreversible. Dominic did not react immediately, and that was what I had come to understand about him. He did not rush moments. He let them exist fully before moving forward. His gaze held mine for a second longer, not questioning, not testing, just confirming, like he needed to see if I would hold my ground. And I did. I did not look away, did not second guess, did not retreat into uncertainty, because this time, the choice had already been made, and I could feel it, steady and clear inside me. "Good," he said quietly, and there was something different in the way he said it now, not just acknowledgement, but something closer to acceptance, like I had crossed a line he recognized. He stepped aside slightly then, giving me space to move first, not leading, not pulling, just allowing. And I understood what that meant. This was still my decision, still my step to take. I turned toward the car, the open door waiting, the interior dimly lit, quiet, controlled, just like before, but it did not feel unfamiliar anymore. It felt like something I was choosing to enter, not something I was being pulled into. I stepped forward, my movement steady, deliberate, and slid into the seat, the door closing softly behind me, sealing the moment with that same quiet finality. Dominic followed a second later, taking his place beside me, and as the car began to move, I realized something that shifted everything again. This was not about escape anymore, not about getting away from something behind me. This was about moving towards something ahead, something I did not fully understand yet, but was no longer afraid to face. The city passed by outside the window, lights stretching into soft lines, familiar streets blending into something new, and I watched it all with a different kind of awareness, not searching for danger, not bracing for impact, just observing, present in a way I had never allowed myself to be before. "You understand now," he said after a moment, his voice low, steady, and I glanced at him. Not startled, not unsure, just attentive. "I think I do," I replied, and the words felt right. Not complete, not finished, but honest. He nodded once, like that was enough, like understanding was not something that needed to be perfect to matter. The silence returned then, but it was not empty. It was full of everything that had been said, everything that had changed, everything that was still unfolding, and for the first time, I did not feel the need to fill it, did not feel the pressure to speak just to prove I was still there. I was there, and that was enough. The car slowed eventually, not at my building this time, but somewhere different, quieter, the kind of place I would have avoided before simply because it was unfamiliar. The door opened, and I stepped out, the night air meeting me again, but this time it felt different, not sharp, not uncertain, just open. I looked around briefly, taking in the space, the calm, the absence of noise, and then I turned back to him, because I knew this moment mattered, not as an ending, but as a shift. "This is where things change," I said, not asking, just stating what I felt. He stepped out beside me, his presence steady as always, his gaze meeting mine with that same quiet intensity. "They already have," he replied, and I felt that truth settle into me completely, not as something new, but as something I had finally accepted. I nodded slowly, taking that in, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The space between us filled with something that did not need to be named to be understood. "You can walk away," he said then, his voice calm, unchanged. "Nothing follows you if you do." And I knew he meant it, not as a challenge, not as a test, just as a fact. The choice was still mine, completely, entirely, and that was what made it real. I looked at him, at the steadiness, at the certainty, at the world he represented, and then I looked at myself, not in a mirror, not in reflection, but in the way I stood, the way I breathed, the way I no longer felt like I needed to shrink to fit into something smaller. I am not walking away, I said, and the words came easily now, not forced, not uncertain, just true. His gaze did not change much, but there was something there, something that acknowledged the weight of that decision, the permanence of it. Then do not look back, he said quietly, and there was no warning in it, no threat, just a simple truth that carried further than the words themselves. I held his gaze for a second longer, letting that settle, and then I nodded once, because I understood, not everything, not yet, but enough to take the next step without hesitation. And as I turned forward,